So, as the big bad orange man is about to be sworn in to enter his second term as president of the United States, as we'd fully expect, liberals are twisting the narrative in order to cope with the upcoming inauguration. And as usual, their take on what's going on is as in line with reality as it's ever been, which is not at all. Let's get into it. Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. I appreciate you being here. Do me a couple favors, hit the thumbs up button, become a subscriber if you're not already, and turn on your notifications so that you never miss out on a conversation like the one we're about to have. So, per the fact that 2/3 of the country overwhelmingly voted to put Trump back in the White House in this last election, including conservatives, independents, and a lot of Democrats who woke up to the reality that their current leaders are actually destroying the country and are actively promoting and celebrating every level of degeneracy imaginable, and would rather take their chances on the guy that the media kept calling Schmittler than putting their own party back in power, it's safe to say that most of us are ready to breathe a huge sigh of relief as we wait for this nightmare of the last 4 years to come to an end and get somebody back in the White House with actual leadership skills who our foreign adversaries are actually afraid of, and if nothing else, who meets the very low bar of being able to form coherent sentences and doesn't need a nap by 10 o'clock in the morning. But of course, as we know, there are unfortunately still plenty of people who are prone to listening to everything that the media tells them, who don't think for themselves, believe that a man who's been investigated probably more than any other human being on earth, yet the worst that the Biden justice system could come up with was mislabeling a transaction in his bookkeeping records, so they had to elevate the charge from the misdemeanor that anybody else would get for the same crime and label it as a felony so that their base would blindly accept the convicted felon narrative. These people are now creating their own narrative about what's going on with Trump's inauguration, including how supposedly dangerous it's going to be to even stay in Washington, D.C., to their wild takes on the recent decision to move the event indoors. They are trying to cope so hard with what's happening. And it's sad because ultimately we'd hope that they would wake up and join the rest of us in the real world. But sometimes we just have to watch people spiral deeper and deeper into delusion and mock them. So let's get into it. First, as far as the historic decision to move the inauguration indoors, in this article it says Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 47th president inside the Capitol Rotunda on Monday, when a polar vortex is forecast to grip the nation's capital. President-elect announced the change of plans in a noontime Truth Social post Friday, writing in part, "There is an Arctic blast sweeping the country. I don't want to see people hurt or injured in any way. It is dangerous conditions for the tens of thousands of law enforcement, first responders, police canines, and even horses, and hundreds of thousands of supporters that will be outside for many hours on the 20th. Therefore, I have ordered the inauguration address, in addition to prayers and other speeches, to be delivered in the United States Capitol Rotunda, as was used by Ronald Reagan in 1985, also because of very cold weather." The incoming president's team had been blasting out invitations for supporters to come to the National Mall to see the outdoor ceremony, which often draws thousands of attendees stretching as far back as the Lincoln Memorial. Now, only a few hundred special guests, lawmakers, and media members will get to see Trump be sworn in for a second time. In his Truth Social post, Trump invited supporters to watch a broadcast of the inaugural ceremony at the 20,000-seat Capital One Arena in downtown Washington, which will also host the inaugural parade. So obviously, there's no question that if people traveled a long way to attend this event and then found out that it was going to be inside and they couldn't watch it live, then they're going to be a little bit upset.
Inauguration Day on Monday is going to look much different now in D.C. because everything is being moved inside when it comes to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's swearing in ceremony. All this preparation you see, these large fences that wrap the Capitol complex, this build that they spent months on, they've been working on it since November. All of this is now going to be taking place inside, but there's still people who came from all around the world to watch Donald Trump be sworn in for his second term. A lot of confusion from them here on the ground about where they can go, how they can watch. Here's their initial reactions.
I mean, as someone who's going to be watching it, I personally disagree, but I understand it's going to be really cold, so maybe not everyone's up for that, but I think it should be outside. It was only inside when Reagan had it because it was on a Sunday, so I think that's a little different.
Everybody knows it's going to be like 15 to 20 degrees before we got in a plane, before we packed. I have 3 snow pants and 4 layers of clothes and double hats and warmers.
For me personally, I would be upset about not seeing it live, but I'm also a really big wimp when it comes to the cold, so I would probably be just fine with it being indoors. Whereas my husband would probably be like these guys because he runs like 50 degrees warmer than I do, so he wouldn't see the point in having it inside. But I would bet that these guys' wives would probably have the same perspective as I do. But anyway, either way, this hasn't stopped libs from enjoying this moment, claiming that this move is because Trump isn't man enough to handle the cold. Never mind that this guy literally took a bullet to the face and then immediately stood up to cheer on the crowd and to reassure them. Whereas the man that they put in office for the last few years has had several questionable moments where we truly thought that he pooped his pants. The lack of awareness of these people can really only be classified at this point as internal gaslighting.
Boy, folks, Orangina Pervalicious Felonious Schlumper McPhee was worried about getting his toesies cold, so he moved the inauguration inside. I'll tell you, nothing looks like leaning into your masculinity like running for the warming hut when Mr. Snow Miser comes to town. So what happened? All the heat lamps were reserved for that day? Nobody could come up with some tiny hand warmers for Orangina's tiny hands? Were they worried all the MAGAs would try to get warm by running in place and the Capitol Police might think they were fixing to storm the Capitol again?
So we have those that are coping by questioning Trump's masculinity, which is ironic coming from a party of people that heavily encourages men to wear dresses. But anyway, then there's a crowd of people coping by claiming that Trump can't attract a crowd.
The real reason Trump's inauguration has been moved indoors has absolutely nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with crowd size and his ego. As we know, crowd size is a touchy subject for that man, and they were expecting some of the smallest crowds ever for an inauguration, even smaller than 2017, and we all know how that worked out, okay? Now, we've had really frigid, cold, even snowy inaugurations in the past. It's never been an issue. The issue is what would have been seen on camera, not just nationally, but internationally. It would have been an embarrassment. So what do you do in that situation when you know you don't have the crowds? You move the event to a smaller venue to make it appear more crowded.
And nobody knows more about doing that than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Do you guys ever wonder what the inside of the bubbles that these people live in look like? I imagine there's a lot of rainbows and snowflakes, but funnily, in the last election, these guys literally elected someone who ran a campaign from their basement and hasn't been able to work for more than 30 minutes a day in the last 4 years. And then they wanted us to vote for someone who needed celebrities in order to attract any attention. And she still lost the Electoral College and the college votes and did worse in every single state than even Biden did. But this gal takes her cope in an entirely different direction.
I feel like one thing people are failing to realize about the upcoming inauguration is that this new era is going to be like COVID. Nothing is ever going to be the same or go back to the way it was before. It's going to be like March 19th, 2020, all over again. Life as we know it will never be how it was, ever again.
Promise? Ma'am, yes, that's exactly why we voted for Trump. We want him and every person he is bringing into his administration to do everything completely different than how Biden and Harris did them. Like, if we could just pretend that the last 4 years didn't happen and convince historians to not write anything about the years 2021 to 2024 into future history books because it's that embarrassing, that would be great. But there are plenty of people who are actually glad that the inauguration is being moved inside because, as unfortunate as it is for people that flew out there and traveled for the event, we understand that for security reasons, this is probably going to be a safer bet.
Inside, and honestly, my anxiety has calmed so much knowing this. I was so nervous. I just felt like I'm sure so many Americans are just holding our breath. Just because we've seen the absolute incompetence and negligence of the Secret Service and their pathetically failed attempts to protecting Donald Trump.
But it's not only that. There are people coming from the party of tolerance, diversity, and inclusivity who can't even handle being in the same city as Trump or anyone who thinks differently than them during the next few days. They want to leave and return only when they have a guarantee that most of the people around them will agree with everything they say and believe. According to this article from The Guardian, it says Washington, D.C. residents flee ahead of Trump inauguration. I can't be here. Alejandra Whitney Smith has plans for President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration next week. Spend a week in a cabin without technology. Quote, inauguration weekend coincides with my birthday weekend, which I usually do spend in DC, but when the election happened, I told myself, oh no, I can't be here, said Whitney Smith, whose mother was working at the Library of Congress during the January 6th attack on the US Capitol in 2021. I just remember that feeling of fear and then also just concern for me being in the city. I just knew for me, I didn't want to be around that sort of hostile, negative energy. Is she talking about the January 6th or the 2020 riots? I'm confused. The DC resident said she will hunker down in a cabin with 4 friends during inauguration weekend and do some vision boarding, reflection, and reconnection. As for the re-election of Trump, she says it represents the ugly side of America that people don't want to acknowledge, except 2/3 of America disagree with you. Another woman tells her story. She says the day after the election, Tia Butler, a Washington, D.C. resident, emailed her relatives asking who was interested in going on a cruise or some other adventure, January 19th to the 25th. For Butler, the memories of the January 6th riot, in which Trump supporters violently stormed the U.S. Capitol in an effort to stop the certification of electoral votes, and encountering pro-life protesters following the 2020 election, makes her not want to be in the city during the inauguration festivities. Initially, Butler was expecting house guests in January in hopes of a different outcome, but she will now spend the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend in California. California, really? I have a fundamental set of beliefs and values that differ greatly from the supporters of the president-elect, so it is just best that I leave and remove myself, said Butler, a human resource executive who had worked for the federal government for nearly 2 decades before leaving to work at a nonprofit. It says to me that we'd rather have a criminal leading our country than a person of color, or a criminal rather than a woman. Let me just remind this person, you have a fundamental set of beliefs that most of the country disagreed with, including countless people in your own party. And while the libs who are still of the massively delusional belief that Kamala Harris would have been the better choice tell themselves that the fact that most of the country voted this man back into office doesn't mean that they're delusional, but actually more intelligent than everyone else, make no mistake, they are not the intellectually superior minority that they seem to believe that they are. They are really the ones who are the most easy to manipulate, to propagandize, and who have the least ability to think independently than anyone else. But I would love to hear all of your thoughts on this in the comments below. Again, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Make sure that you are subscribed. Keep it real, guys, and I will see you in the next one.